I always say that writing starts with living. So we don't get to be different people when we come to the page. You certainly can fake and pose and posture in your writing. Of course, you can do that in any area of life, but the best writing is the overflow of honest living.
Welcome to 3%. We're your hosts, Jamie Haig.
And I'm Blake Roberts.
We're two best friends, fathers, husbands, and just two guys trying to figure it out.
We're also therapists, which is probably a pretty important part.
That's true.
And we believe that at our best, people are 97% honest with themselves and others. And it's that hidden 3% of emotions, needs, desires, and behaviors that we keep to ourselves that keep us bound to shame and loneliness, from which many of our issues stem.
Each week on this podcast, we'll interview leaders in the fields of psychology, theology, arts, and athletics to explore holistic masculinity. We're not here to tell you the man you need to be, but we are here to help you explore what gets in the way of being the man you want to be.
We're going to help you develop courage and give you the tools to share your 3% in the relationships that matter most, so you can more deeply connect with yourself, God, and others. So, pull up a chair.
Let's get into it.
So let's be honest, let's be honest, let's be honest, let's be honest, won't you be?
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the 3% Podcast. Today we have Will Parker Anderson on. He's a new friend of ours, and let's see, when we'll be releasing this one, we would have already released our conversation with Mark Typo, who, as you heard in that episode, is a writer that I met through Substack, which you've heard us talk a little bit about. And Will is also another writer that I've met on Substack. Substack is filled with so many great people. If you guys aren't hanging out there yet, you ought to. Will is a senior editor at Penguin Random House, and he's a writing coach. He has a podcast called The Writer Circle, where he shares tips about writing and publishing. He's a follower of Jesus. He's a dad, a husband. And for those of you who have already heard that and then are like, oh, I'm going to just keep going because I'm not a writer, we're not necessarily going to be giving writing tips in this show. There might be some, but that's not the purpose of the show, at least not the purpose of this episode. We're going to explore the stories we tell ourselves and how writing in and of itself is actually a practice that can be really beneficial for our mental, spiritual, emotional health, whether that be journaling or maybe writing a book. Maybe you're listening and you do have this desire in you to write a book, and maybe this episode will be encouraging to you. So, with all that being said, welcome to the show, Will. A lot of W's there.
Yeah, I gotta watch so you don't trip over those. Great to be here with both of you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, glad you're here. So we like to start out asking each guest, how would you define holistic masculinity?
Yeah, you guys really jump into the deep end. Kudos to you for that.
That's our deal, man.
A
couple of therapists. It's hard to avoid it.
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's such a hotly contested issue in our time, right? So you almost have to tune out all of that. I work in publishing, and so we get proposals and book ideas all the time about what it means to be a man or a woman, or whether those categories are even correct, right? This is the world that we live in. But I think my simplest answer, and I haven't heard how all of your guests have answered this. There may be a lot of overlap. I don't know. But I immediately think of Jesus. And, that's the Sunday school answer. But there's no greater example for me as a follower of Jesus as to what a real man looks like. And so I was thinking through this just yesterday. The leadership of Jesus, which confounded even his closest friends. They didn't understand quite what he was about until a bit later after his death and resurrection. But the thing he kept pointing them to over and over is this lifestyle of servanthood. And so to me, that's the word that comes to mind when I think about what is, you said holistic masculinity.
Yeah.
some of I wouldn't even say they're completely stereotypes. I think there's truth to these things. Maybe they've just been overplayed or overblown, or maybe masculinity has been reduced to these things. But things like strength, leadership, sacrifice, those are important. But to me, they all fit under the banner of servanthood, because things like leadership and strength without servanthood become arrogance, exploitation, pride, dominance, harshness. So it's the servanthood of Jesus. If it's Philippians 2, he had all the power of the universe at his fingertips. And power is also a dirty word sometimes in modern life, power and privilege. Jesus had both, but in their purest form. And he, unlike us, had complete, rights to use that power however he deemed appropriate. And yet, Philippians 2 tells us he was willing to lay that down to make himself nothing in the form of a servant, in the form of a man, that he became obedient to death, even death on a cross. And so you have ultimate power, willingly embracing weakness to become a servant. And so men on average are physically stronger. Of course, there are exceptions to this. What are we doing with that strength? Are we using it to serve, or are we using it to exploit? So I think of the word servanthood. I think every day, especially as when I think about being a husband and a father, I think, and it's really hard to use the strength, the energy, the time that I've been given and gifted in a way that serves my family, puts them first. When there's a lot in me that just wants to put myself first, that wants to come first, that doesn't want to be bothered with the needs of others. And I got 3 young kids, so there are a lot of needs that start around 6 a.m. and continue until about 7:30, 8 p.m.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's my short answer. But that's the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that very difficult question.
I think that's a beautiful answer. It definitely has some overlap with some things we've heard before, but I love how cohesive it was in how you said it. I don't think it's been depicted as modeling our servanthood after Jesus so far. Sheila Gregor, she talked about kind of the intentionality of setting aside our privilege of being a man to be able to care for those around us. Like, we have the privilege of not caring if we didn't want to, was her point. And that masculinity for her looks like setting that aside in humility to care for those around you. And I definitely feel like that is highlighted in you talking about Jesus as a servant, being able to, even his life, he's got the position of authority, power, and privilege of being the Son of God, and he lays it down with humility to serve us who he had no requirement to do so for. So
Yeah, I like that.
Definitely some overlap.
Yeah, I would say too, Will, that definition is, like, I could tell that came. We didn't give you much time to think on that before we hit record, so I can tell that it comes from something genuine in you, because I think that's kind of what even drew me to you when I started seeing you on Substack, is like the way that you are serving writers and even aspiring writers through just like sharing your experience, but you're not just sharing tips. I mean, you are, but there's this element of it that just felt like it kind of drew me in a little bit. And so when, like, on this show, we interview people in the categories of psychology, theology, the arts, and athletics, like those respective fields. And so you kind of fit into that, the arts category for me. And so I was like, Jamie, we need to have this guy on, because he's beyond just being a writing coach. Like there is something that embodies this sort of 3% theme, which is kind of what we look for in our guests, which is the core of that is vulnerability and honesty. And as I think about vulnerability and like storytelling, one question that was coming to mind that I would love for you to put some language to is, how would you say, and maybe even speaking from your own experience, why would you say telling the truth is hard for men? And you could talk about that in general, like in relationship, or you could talk about that from the perspective of, because I think you work with a lot of like nonfiction writers, and so there's probably an element of storytelling and telling the truth of their own stories in the books they're writing. But yeah, I'm curious how you see the interplay of vulnerability and storytelling, and why telling the truth is difficult for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. So by telling the truth, you mean vulnerability, like showing the world what's really happening inside you, kind of a thing?
Yeah, I would say those two kind of are very connected for me.
Yeah. Well, I think vulnerability is difficult whether you're writing or just in a relationship, having a conversation over a meal, in a meeting at work, sharing about frustrations that you have, or having the courage to share, or, talking with your kids. So I always say that writing starts with living. So we don't get to be different people when we come to the page. You certainly can fake and pose and posture in your writing. Of course, you can do that in any area of life, but the best writing is the overflow of honest living. And so, yeah, something we see in a lot of writers is they're not sure how to share, or they're sort of stuck. They have like 2 or 3 emotional gears in their life. So they can be the fiery truth teller, or they could be the sympathetic, I see you comforter. And they maybe have 2 or 3 of those, but their emotional bandwidth, if you will, is limited. And so part of what I do as an editor is, number one, I want them to be true to themselves. We all have personalities, proclivities. Some of us tend to be more solemn. Some of us are funny. Some of us are really vulnerable and are just like an open book. Others are more reserved. So you want to respect that, of course. But the best writing is willing, I think, to push the writer's heart, mind, soul to a point where they're able to open up. They're able to fully name the ache that they're feeling. They're able to fully process the trauma that they lived through. They're able to fully express with joy, the hope that they have. And the minute you start to sort of neuter your emotions, or box them in, is the moment that your writing becomes stale. And so, yeah, I'm thinking in an editorial context, but a lot of times we'll say the truth, but we won't show the truth. We'll say, hey, this is what happened, and here's what I learned from it. But it's like, whoa, you just skipped over all the pain and the processing, and it could be positive emotions too. Like what that felt like when you had your first child, or when, you got your dream job, or when you found out that the person you'd fallen in love with, loved you back, whatever it is. Yeah, it's really important, I would say, to answer your question. Vulnerability in writing is a core essential. It's like, without it, what are you even talking about? If you're not bringing your full self to the page, then you're bringing your half self. And of course, everything can be taken too far. So the opposite is oversharing. But yeah, I could go on, but I think what holds us back is the risk of it. I remember John Tyson told me once on my podcast that what hurts the most about criticism and feedback in his writing is not people disagreeing with him. It's people exploiting those moments he was vulnerable and saying, see, I knew there was something wrong with this guy. And now I see it. and look what a sinner you are. He's like, that's what hurts when people take cheap shots, when he's chosen to be vulnerable. That's the fear that we all have, is that we don't want people to see the skeletons in our closet and then heap shame on our heads. And that's the risk that we take. And I can tell you people will do that. But the majority will feel safe and seen, and your vulnerability will trigger and give permission. Trigger is a bad word. Give permission for them to also be vulnerable and to know that it's okay to not be okay. So
I don't know about you,
I like
Jamie.
using the word trigger for something positive.
Yeah.
yeah, right. It's just, you got to be careful with those words that always mean one thing in our modern minds, but yeah, you can trigger good things as well.
Yeah, I like that.
I don't know about you, Jamie, but as he's talking about this in the context of like a relationship with writing, there's definitely a lot of overlap in just like how we show up in relationship with each other. Were you picking up on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you were saying that, like, you can't bring, you can't show up as somebody different to the page. Like, I think that's applicable in, well, and then you followed it up with, you can fake it and you can bring half of yourself to the relationship. I think ultimately our whole goal, 3% is the idea that at our very best, we are 97% honest, and it's the 3% that we keep to ourselves that binds us to shame and loneliness, from which a lot of our other issues stem. And so relationally, we feel that the vulnerability of sharing your 3% with others, trusted others, as you were saying, like, we're not trying to get people to be oversharers with everybody. We don't want you to necessarily become this open wound to others, because there's a lot of sacredness to everyone's story as well. And to honor that means establishing safety with others. But I think if you're not bringing that 3% to the relationships that matter to you, you will always feel the gap between where you are and where you want to be relationally with them. And it sounds like that shows up in pretty good writing to like great writing.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. And it reminds me of something I've often thought about, which sounds heretical. So this will be fun.
Yeah, sweet.
I think we often think that God is enough and that he's all we need to be healthy people. And there's a sense in which that's true, that God is all sufficient. But it's interesting that from the beginning of the story of Scripture, God says, everything is very good, but it is not good for man to be alone. And so there's this lie that we believe that because human relationships are hard and some have lived through unbelievable hurt from the hands of others. So totally understandable that this is a coping mechanism that we have. But we start to think that, oh, well, I have Jesus, and so I don't really need other people. And so relationally, like on a horizontal level, these people are trapped inside, are not sharing themselves, but they then assume falsely that they can be completely honest with God, that they're bringing their honest selves to God's. And that's actually a lie. The lie is that I can be completely 100 with God and then hide from others. Like, God gets me, but no one else does. And the fact is, we actually have to practice horizontally what we hope to have vertically. You know what I mean?
So good.
You cannot, your prayer life with God will not be vulnerable and open, at least not to the extent that you're telling yourself it is, if you have not shared your deepest, darkest secrets with other humans, or your greatest hopes with other humans. People disagree with me on this, but you can't do it. I see it again and again. People start using God as their trump card. Like, well, it's dysfunctional out there with others, but God gets me. God is my confidant. God is the one that, and of course, there's a sacred intimacy we have with our Heavenly Father, but you cannot, again, if you're dysfunctional horizontally and relationally, you cannot suddenly flip the switch with your relationship with God. And that is by design. God speaks to us often through other people. He touches our lives through other people. He corrects us through other people. He encourages us through other people. And so I thought this for years, but then someone who really articulated it in a way that grabbed me was Justin Whitmore Early in his book on friendship, which is called Made for People. And in that book, he literally says, when the truth sounds like heresy, and he says, God is not all you need for your relationship with God. And you're just like, what? And then he makes the case. And God in his wisdom and kindness has given us others as a way to point us to him. We cannot be as close to God as we are designed to be, created to be, until we are in close relationship with other people. And that connection for me changes a lot of the way I think in the modern world. And I'd put it like this: the way that I aspire to live. I don't think I'm living that way as fully as I want to. There's a lot working against me and against all of us when it comes to living in a way where you are known by others. We're so isolated, so individualistic. Other people are really an inconvenience in modern life, but we don't realize it because we're so connected. We're always looking in on the lives of others via social. We're even interacting digitally, but we're not known. And so that's why I say I'm aspiring to live this way and trying to find ways to be sort of a revolutionary relationally, because that's what it takes today, I think, to be known. You have to really push back on the isolation and be intentional about living with others.
Dude is preaching
Whoa.
today. I told you this wasn't going to
Yeah,
be
that was
just
long. That
about
was long.
writing. No, that was good. And you're not. I don't know who disagrees with you on that. I'd be really interested to talk to them because we're not two of them.
I'm curious. Well, I'm kind of curious where they do disagree. Like, I would be curious to hear what pushback you have heard on that, because maybe someone who's listening is feeling
That's a good point.
a pushback to that, and it'd be nice to hear how they do push back and how you feel about that pushback.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know if anyone's ever debated me per se, but I was a pastor for over 10 years. And so, I know some of the narratives that are out there, and I think it's a theological pushback that comes from relational hurt. And so the pushback is theological in the sense that people would say, well, you're saying that God is not sufficient and that somehow there's this gap that he can't fill, that you are replacing with other people or filling in with others. And that, again, it sounds heretical to them. But I think maybe where that comes from, if someone's really viscerally pushing back on that, is probably because it's a liability to love and be loved. It's that famous Lewis quote, which I'm going to butcher, where he says, if you want to avoid pain, great, you can do that. Cut people off, but you'll become a shell of a human being, and your heart will become this cold, shriveled thing. To love is to lose, right? Eventually. So that vulnerability comes with a cost. Being known comes with a cost. And that's where I think at the core of it, people's pushback comes from. Again, they've probably lived through things that would make us weep, where we would feel the weight of that and not know what to say. That's what's driving them to say, like, no, all I need is God. And I think we have to have real humility and not correcting that in a way that's unkind. But the reason I would push back or help to point that person back to human relationship is because that's actually where a lot of their healing is going to happen. I mean, you two know better than most because of what you do, but it's the very source of their pain is also the source of their healing. Maybe not the same exact people. Those people might need to be cut off, or there may need to be some new boundaries or reconciliation, but healing is going to come through someone, and God's going to use that someone or those people to bring healing. And so, yeah, this is a weird analogy, but I've been to Belize a bunch of times, and there's a certain plant that grows. I think it's called blackwood or something like that, and it's really poisonous, and if you touch it, it blisters your skin. It's almost like an acid. And a tour guide was pointing this out to us and saying, hey, as you're hiking through the jungle, just avoid this plant. But then he said, the interesting thing is the only cure for this acidic plant is this other plant, which I don't remember the name of. And it grows right beside the poisonous plant. Like, that's where you find it. So the poison and the cure grow side by side. And that to me has always been a good analogy for church hurt or any kind of relational tension, where it's like people hurt you, you want to then avoid people, but actually people are the source of your healing.
Yes.
And it's confusing. It's muddy. It's like, how can poison and healing be side by side? They should be on separate planets or in separate areas. But again, that's the world that we live in. And so it's helping people and reminding them that there really is, there are people out there that will love them well. And it's our job to imperfectly, be those people and find those people, because we need them.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're hurt in relationship and we heal in relationship. And when you're talking about, I mean, it's so true in so many like aspects of my story of this idea that you're talking about, that God is enough and we have to be in relationship with other people honestly and vulnerably. Like, they have to experience 100% of us, not 97% of us. And I think about what was coming to my mind when you were saying that is Jamie and I met in 12-step recovery. And when we're talking about the conversation of pornography addiction or unwanted sexual behavior, especially in the like evangelical Christian space, there can be a lot of language and desire even of like, God, this is something that God needs to deliver you from, and he just like heals you from this struggle. And I like know people who that is their story that they're telling. And I'm not, I used to think either something's wrong with me, because that has not happened to me, or these people are just full of it and are just like selling some program. And I don't know these people well enough to know the truth of that. But what I have experienced that is true for me now is God has not, on his own with just me individually, removed and like healed me completely from this. Have I had a lot of recovery, and am I not doing a lot of the things that I used to do? Absolutely. So has there been a lot of progress? Absolutely. But it has not been something that I would say I have like found like God like just removed this thing from me and I never think about it or struggle with it again. And to me, where I am in my journey with that now is such a gift, actually, I would say, for me, because it then forces me, if I want to be the man that I want to be dependent on other people that can walk with me in that journey that I have to daily surrender to with my relationship with God, but also with people. And through those, like Jamie's obviously one of those people and other people that I've met in this journey of recovery. Through the dependence on those people, I have actually found I would say, more intimate relationship with God through the tangible presence of other people that I don't know that I would have had in this way if this was just something that he came and took from me and was like, all right, Blake, you're good now.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
And I would maybe even take your heresy a little further, Will, and I would say, like, obviously I have a similar story to Blake with porn addiction, and that's how we met and the recovery from that. But listeners of this show already know that I was abused by a youth pastor for a number of years, and that we're talking about how some people have pushback because they're like, well, God's all I need. And I kind of had the opposite end of that feeling where it's like, I don't know that God gives two rips about me. And I also don't feel like internally it doesn't feel like that is truth, but my experience is screaming that at me. And I think that was kind of the incongruence of trying to heal from that, was like, I really do think God is real in my heart. And my head is going, well, this is a pretty sucky experience. Like, you've got a pretty uniquely bad version of God then. Like, and I think I'm kind of on the end of it. And I don't know if this is helpful for somebody to hear, but it's why I'm saying it, is like, God showed up for me through the hands and feet, and I think drew me back to him through the hands and feet, and in ways that I wasn't asking him for. I wasn't going to be the guy who was like, well, God's going to be enough for me. We're going to be okay in our little prayer closet over here. I was like, if you're going to want me in that prayer closet, you're going to have to freaking drag me there, big guy. And
Yeah. Wow.
I think that is a little bit like Blake's one of the people who dragged me back over there in through loving me, through being safe for me, through and it did take a lot of, I think people could probably listen to this now and think, wow, Jamie's like maybe overly vulnerable, maybe a little on the side of oversharer. And that would be a fair assessment at this point. I do think if you met me 10 years ago, you would have thought I was the other end of that spectrum. And the only reason that I have traversed my way to having good relationships with other people and having a relationship that is worthwhile with God is because I love what you said earlier. God said it's not good that man should be alone. And I really feel like we neglect the idea that God might be showing his love to you exclusively through his hands and feet at times. And if you dismiss them, then you might actually be dismissing him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Why does God involve us as super flawed, fumbling people to communicate his love? It seems like he could have chosen a much more efficient method. And I think maybe God's not as interested in efficiency as he is in loving us well and giving us experiences of both loving others and receiving love from others that shapes us in a way that, as it was said earlier, helps us depend on him, but is really satisfying. I mean, to be truly seen and cared for by another person, especially, man, I'm so sorry to hear about your experience.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that would be like. But the fact that there were people placed in your life that loved you well, and one of them is sitting right here, which is an incredible backstory, I think, to this show, tells the story. You know what I mean? Like, you couldn't have gotten back to a relationship with the Lord without that. And I'm the same. I need other people. There's another angle that comes to mind, and I'm kind of bringing my pastoral perspective here, but that's a really dangerous way that this breaks down, is that when you feel a responsibility to always be the spiritual quote unquote leader in a room, and you find your worth and identity in either having the answers or being a compassionate listener or whatever it is, whatever you've attached your identity to, then suddenly you can't just be in a room and receive. You start feeling like you can't be vulnerable yourself because what will people think? And the longer you practice that, the longer you shut off that part of you that's just honest and willing to show up fully you, that part of you starts to die. And that's when certain, I think, vices start to creep into our life, because when there's no outlet, there's no pressure valve or release, you just explode. And we're seeing that all over the place. So, and you don't have to be a pastor or even a spiritual leader. I mean, we feel that same pressure in our families because of the role that maybe we have. Older siblings feel this a lot, I think. But all that to say, it's been really good for my soul to willingly choose and try to make a habit of opening my life and recognizing that it can get pretty dark inside of me. And so I got to be letting light in and not letting the darkness build up and build up and build up. Vulnerability is not an event. It's a lifestyle. It's a habit. And so to try to just punctuate my life with letting people in, and you guys are all about vulnerability, so we can dive in here. Last week, it's the first time I've shared this with anyone other than my wife.
Let's go.
It's fresh, but I found myself in a really unexpected situation where someone was upset with me because of something I had done, and I didn't even see it coming. And so they asked me some really pointed questions, and I lied in the moment. I was freaked out, kind of fumbled in the moment, and told them what I thought would spare me some disappointment in them. And then for the next 24 hours, I just suffered under the weight of that decision and reached out to a mentor, processed with my wife, and decided I have to come clean about this, because this is going to be a lie that I then have to defend. And the worst part was it involved a third person who then I would have had to pull into this narrative. And I'm like, I can't do that. Come what may, I got to come clean. And so I did. And to this person's credit, they were so gracious and understanding, and even went as far to say, Will, this doesn't diminish my opinion of you, but it increases my respect, because I know that it's not easy to come clean about things like this, and you did it quickly, honestly. But anyways, there was relief that came, but I still feel the cost of that, and I still feel foolish because of it. I can't believe I did that. I felt like I was like 10 years old again, confessing a lie to my parents or something. And here I am, 38, 3 kids, still falling into the same trap. But I will say that let some light into my soul. And one thing my mentor said to me that really stood out, he was like, he wasn't telling me what to do, but he said, in 10 years, what decision would you be the most proud of?
Great question.
He asked me a couple other great questions too. He has so much gold. Shout out to JR. But, and then afterwards, he was encouraging me as well after I had confessed this. And he was like, I hope someday you're like teaching a session at a writer's conference, or maybe teaching somewhere. And I hope you get to tell this story, and you get to make known what happened, but also what you learned through it, and what God did, and that you can actually be proud of what happened, you know? And so, and if I had hidden it and buried it, there would have been a small payoff in that I would have saved myself embarrassment and a little bit of shame and a lot of fear. But that little seed of insecurity and shame would have stayed in my life, and it slowly would have sprouted into other things. And all that to say, vulnerability can make you look really stupid and, you know, come with some humble pie. And to confess a lie feels theoretically like below me. I'm like, because of my age, because of, you know, the fact that I consider myself a semi-mature person, I'm a dad. I'm like, wow, I'm just not as sophisticated and mature as I thought I was. Now, what do I do with that? Okay, I guess I do what I did when I was 10. I tell the truth and I apologize. And so grateful that in this instance, I was met with grace. I was met with kindness, even encouragement, like far more than I deserved. But vulnerability can be worth it. And I think it's actually, I would say confession in particular is always the right option, even when it comes with some cost.
Yeah, I tend to believe that it's more of a reflection of someone's like value in your life if you are vulnerable with them and they make you feel stupid for being vulnerable. I rarely think that that's a reflection of the person who chose to be vulnerable. I think our stories, I think our stories dictate to us feeling like the embodied feeling of feeling stupid when we were vulnerable with someone who was unsafe in our past. And then that feeling makes us feel like if we are going to be vulnerable now, we're going to feel the same way. But the reality, I think, is that those who deserve to hold the sacredness of your story will only find you human and humble for when you're vulnerable. And I think that's always like, that's why we're so passionate about the 3% thing, because it's like, yeah, some people are definitely going to mistreat you if you're vulnerable with them. That we're not trying to fake that. But we are saying the people who deserve to love you, deserve to hold space and care for you, it will only give you the experience of grace that you experienced. Like, if you want to experience God's hands and feet through grace, I don't think it's going to happen if you're not vulnerable with somebody.
Yeah, it's good. Well, growing up, so confession was encouraged, but what I've realized, and I had wonderful parents, but I think one mistake our family made is that when one of us kids, I have one sister, when we would confess, the attention would immediately go to damage control. Like, okay, who else did this involve? How do we manage the optics? How do we make sure they're not pissed? How do we preserve the family name? Rather than I think the opportunity that those moments of confession offered, which is kind of what my mentor did with me, which is to say, hey, whatever happens with these other people, we're going to make it right. But I'm proud of you, you know, like this is forming you into a man of God or a person of character or whatever you want to say, but really capturing that moment. And of course, the ripple effect of our mistakes matter, right? Making it right with others matter. The opinions that others have of us matter to a certain extent. But I do think it's a miss when what we really care about the most is just the public perception rather than the act itself, and saying like, no, this is an act of courage and obedience. Thank you. I'm proud of you. My buddy says this great phrase. He's like, what gets affirmed gets repeated. And so inadvertently, I think we were taught as kids, like, oh, the reason that you confess is so that people aren't mad at you, or so that our family, looks the way they should look in the eyes of others, rather than like, no, we do the right thing no matter what, because it's the right thing, and because God is pleased with that, and because it turns you into, decision by decision, the person you were created to be, but leads to a life of freedom. Those are some of the themes that maybe were there implicitly growing up, but definitely what we saw the most was the reactivity,
Yeah.
I think, to like, oh, let's make sure no one's upset. And as long as that's okay, then we're okay. So it's just interesting to think back.
We could have a whole
Yeah.
episode just on that piece. Well,
Yeah.
and like what we're talking about here is not just like theory or good idea. Like it is neurobiology. Like I'm just, because you talked about earlier about being seen and known, and this was an experience where you were seen and known in your vulnerability, in your, using air quotes, weakness. And it made me think of Kurt Thompson, which if any of our listeners are friends with him, by the way, please send this to him because we would love to have him on the show. Kurt Thompson talks about how he has this wonderful quote where he says, we, like, from the womb, we come into the world looking for someone, and for someone looking for us. And anybody that has kids,
I love this quote.
anybody that has kids
Yeah.
knows that that's true, right? And so when we're like deeply really seen and known by somebody, like it sounds like you had with this moment with your mentor, it literally activates like brain circuits tied to emotional regulation and memory and healing and all this stuff, right? So it's like it is not just and you can, listeners, go listen or read more, because Kurt talks about interpersonal interpersonal neurobiology, which is just like what happens in the brain in the context of relationship. And it's fascinating stuff. And it's like our brains literally rewire when we have this moment where we are fully seen and known and cared for, especially in moments of shame, in moments where we are disappointed in ourselves, where we can just experience the presence of someone's face, right? Or their, because that's one of the things he talks about is I had to look it up so I don't butcher it. The, like, early in our development, we attune primarily in the right hemisphere of our brain, which picks up on like facial expression, tone, nonverbal cues, all that stuff. And so like as kids, we're growing up and we're picking up on emotional cues, nonverbals, all these things. And then we're making up stories about what those mean, which may or may not be true, but then that creates all of these reactions. Like when I get caught in a lie, I need to make up another one in order to keep myself safe, right? But when someone really sees you, like emotionally, he says your right brain actually feels met. And so this co-regulation actually calms the nervous system and helps to create integration. And then we can talk about like forming new neural pathways and like all this stuff. So it's like, this is not just good idea. Like this is how our brains work. Being vulnerable and leaning into that, especially with people like this mentor who can hold that safety and then meet us there, literally changes us, not just figuratively.
That's incredible. I used to teach, and one of my colleagues said, like, the greatest moments of discipleship are the moments of discipline. So those moments when students are acting up, like how you respond there, and it's a weird environment because you have an audience of like 28 other people as you're dealing with one issue with a student, and that really it shifted my paradigm to see those disciplinary moments as like, here's a problem, here's a fire I need to put out, or here's some authority I need to exert, to seeing it as a moment of discipleship. And that really, my natural inclination in that environment was to be commanding, harsh, direct. But that really pushed me more towards gentleness. And I would say grace, like undeserved gentleness, like just when I'm being blatantly, disrespected or whatever the situation was, it was amazing to me and truly a lesson that I have logged in my own heart. Gentleness in those moments is powerful. And I remember the clincher was I had a student cornering me, confronting me about something she felt was unfair. And she was asking for an extension on this assignment. I held my ground and I said, no, but I'm really sorry that this is frustrating and I want to help you. I'm for you, but it is due tomorrow. So let me know what you need. She stormed out. The next day she walked in and came up to me and called me Mr. Anderson, of course, school context, but was like Matrix throwback there, but was like, I'm sorry about yesterday. I'm sorry for what I said. And I just remember thinking like, man, old Will would have really pushed back and got into this like verbal sparring match. But I was super calm, kept my voice low, tried to be as warm as I could. And I'll just never forget that because it was like, oh my gosh, this works. The other thing doesn't. And so as you were talking, Blake, it just reminded me that you're absolutely right. When we are met with gentleness, even when we're in our ugliness, that unlocks something neurologically, biologically, emotionally, I would even say spiritually, because
100%.
that is the heart of God. If he treated us like our actions and thoughts and motivations deserved, we'd be gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
His patience is unfathomable. And I got to taste a little of that this past week. Through my own mistake and experience, but was just reminded what a gift it is to be met with grace in our worst moments, our most embarrassing moments.
Beautiful.
And can we say also just real quick, it wasn't a focus of that story, but one of the takeaways that I hear in spaces like that where someone does a great job of taking their vulnerability to others to have it reflected back to them before they try to go back into a hard, vulnerable place is get yourself a mentor, man.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I feel deeply lonely and you're having a hard time even with friendships, there's someone in your world who would love to love on you if you're vulnerable enough to ask them. And mentors are I feel like they're an underappreciated, beautiful thing in our culture right now. And I think you just heard from Will's story how effective it can be in healing you and then allowing healing between you and others because of their influence in your life.
Yep. Beautifully said.
Yeah, that's good. We don't always know how to respond to our own darkness. And it's not like, we might know the right thing to do, but having someone else in your corner who is safe, like objective in a way, and is just willing to ask good questions. I feel for people because those folks are hard to find. And I think when some hear, hey, go get a mentor, they're like, I'd love to. Where do I find one?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but they are out there, and I think no mentor's perfect. So just having someone wiser, probably older, although it doesn't have to be. But I have younger friends who are far wiser than me in many ways, and I actually reach out to them quite often. But yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
Well, Will, thank you for hanging out with us. This has been really fun and really encouraging, honestly, in many ways. Where can people, if they want to learn more about you, follow the work you're doing in the world, how can people engage with you beyond this show?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. It's real simple. It's just writercircle.co, so .co, and that's a place where you can sign up for my newsletter where I talk about things like vulnerability in communication and, of course, writing. And I also have a podcast by the same name, so Writer Circle. And that's a super vulnerable space because I invite communicators and writers to come and talk about their process. So, we're not talking about grammar, punctuation. We do talk about craft in writing, but a lot of it is about how we bring our stories to other people and how to tell them well. And some of the themes we touched on, like how to bring your full self to those environments, even when there's risk, when there's criticism, and how to process that. So I think I see a lot of beautiful overlap between what we're doing, but it would just be, if you want to learn more, writercircle.co.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I am an aspiring author. I'm a writer. I write things, not published anything as far of a book yet, but whenever I'm feeling like, whenever the writer in me needs not tips necessarily, although I get that, but just encouragement, I'm like, I need to go listen to the Writer's Circle, because it is that. Like, it is so encouraging, and I feel like I'm just sitting in the room with the two of you. So, yeah, if any aspiring writers on here, go check out Will's show. Thanks for being here, Will.
Yeah, and everybody, we're glad you're here. Keep coming back. You're worth it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode. Listen, we're working on some really practical resources to help you connect more deeply with yourself and others. So if you head over to our website, 3percentco.com, you can learn more about that. The link will be in the show notes. And this is the part of the show where we ask you for some help. Listen, we don't have a big fancy production team. We're recording these in my therapy office in between sessions and in the margins of our life. We just really believe in the message that much. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and rarely would I take the time to review and rate a show, just because honestly, I forgot. It wasn't until we started doing this show that I realized doing that actually really does help these platforms notice our show and get the word out. And so if any of this is impactful to you, we would love it if you took a second to leave us a review, rate us, or if you want to just do it the old-fashioned way, text this link to a friend and say, hey, let's talk about this episode. Whatever you do, make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're listening to so you never miss an episode. We're really grateful you're here, and we'll see you next week.
So let's be honest.